All right, everyone. Should we begin? Welcome to Keeping It Real, helping the high-profile client buy and sell smart. A few general housekeeping notes to keep in mind is please mute yourself during the presentation. We'll open it up for Q&A at the end of the presentation. You're welcome to post questions throughout and at the end via the chat box, if you would, please. So my name is Shane David Hall, and I'm the Director of Sports and Entertainment Specialty Practice for Palmallard Advisors. We launched this specialty practice in the fall of this year, in 2020, simply because we've noticed that over the course of our 10 years since the founding of our company, that there's a void in this market for high-profile clients, specifically when working with high-value tangible assets and collectibles. Our hope with this practice is that we'll be able to bring some due diligence and discipline to the acquisition, the management, and ultimately perhaps the monetization and deaccessioning of these objects. So as the potential client or owner grows in their career, they make wise investments and purchases. They care for those objects over time, and with appropriate due diligence, we are harnessing the market in terms of a right time perhaps to sell or make a strategic gift or something along those lines. We are the only tangible asset advisory firm that has a dedicated practice focusing on high-profile clients. I'm also joined today by my colleague, Roxanne Cohen. Roxanne is our Director of Art Advisory. Roxanne comes to us from Christie's, where she worked with private clients in the post-war and contemporary department, and has been with the firm for 3 years. And then finally, and certainly not least, my colleague, Carrie Lee Jeffrey, is also joining us today. Carrie has been with the firm really since inception, since beginning in 2010. Carrie holds over 10 years of experience in the international domestic auction world, focusing on fine and decorative arts as well as rare books and manuscripts. Sorry. So really, who are these high-profile clients? We often talk about clients in terms of a broad sense, but I think it's important to focus on these clients that have notoriety, fame, and fortune, and that are oftentimes household names, and what it is they might do and how they might fall and really need this specialized practice. So we're often seeing and working with artists, actors, celebrities, personalities of some kind, musicians, those in the music industry, be it a writer, a producer, or an executive, authors and journalists, film and TV industry personalities, as well as those behind the scenes. Of course, athletes and coaches, as well as franchise owners, business executives and entrepreneurs, those who are at the head of let's say, a Fortune 500 company. Of course, politicians, restaurateurs and chefs would fall into this category, models, and then oftentimes we like to focus on what we would call a legacy family, those families with a long-term high net worth wealth and significant name recognition, the Vanderbilt family, so forth and so on, for a general example. What we see with these individuals is that oftentimes there's a lack of management when it comes to their tangible assets. And if we look at this particular chart, we can see a percentage breakdown of the asset classes that oftentimes make up these tangible assets within their greater portfolio. We'll see that paintings and pictures make up the largest percentage at 70%. And then jewelry behind at 10%. The remainder falls into place with sculptures, collectibles, photography, and then finally decorative arts makes up the smallest percentage at 2%. It's important to keep in mind that when we're thinking about tangible assets or we're talking about tangible assets, that these asset classes oftentimes make up about 20% of a client's overall net worth and their portfolio. And so in reality, we're talking about a large portion of wealth that is oftentimes a very, very large number. So if we change those percentages into dollars and cents, we're really looking at about $174 million in paintings and prints made up in the collections of high profile clients and celebrities and so forth and so on. 25 million for jewelry, 12 million for sculpture. And we can see how those numbers decrease as the asset classes change as well. So in reality, these are very large portions of a client's overall net worth. And it's important to think about how we're managing the acquisition of these objects, what it means to acquire an object for an appropriate price, to complete due diligence, how to care for this object while it's in the collection. Are we thinking about risk management? Do we have burden of proof covered? Is there storage or appropriate shipping needs that need to be thought about? So forth and so on. And then oftentimes at the end of this cycle, we're talking about monetization. And the planning for these objects for the long term. What are the next steps now that the market has perhaps ripened, or the client has decided that these no longer meet their collecting needs, or so forth and so on? I'd like to focus on buying tangible assets with intelligence first. And so I'd like to loop in my colleague Roxanne Cohen. Rox, talk to us a little bit about how we determine if a venue is a reliable and transparent place to actually buy an object. Rox? You may be on mute.
Sorry. Hi, I'm here. I'd say if you were looking at galleries, dealers, and auction houses, the most transparent would be an auction house. And that's really purely because a lot of the results are listed online. So auction houses have to be transparent. When you go to a gallery and a dealer, then there's not as much transparency, and that's sometimes when it's good to use an advisor who can give you, who knows the market fully, who can kind of give you that bit of transparency. But one of the most important things would be, if you are looking at a specific artist, if you don't want to go the auction route and you want to go the gallery route, it's best to go to a gallery that's well-known dealer for that artist, or well-known to kind of represent artists within the same realm of the artist that you're looking at.
That's good to know. And so if you're thinking about the differentials between, let's say, auction and a retail gallery, what are the differences in terms of purchase price?
Well, there's a lot of pros and cons from auction versus gallery. The auction market is, as we say, it's fair market value. It is what the market is today. And as I said, everything is listed online. So when you are buying from an auction, you're paying the market price. A lot of the time when you go to a gallery, they usually put an increase in the price because they know that there's no competitive bidding compared to at a gallery. It's compared to at an auction house. So you might pay higher for the convenience of walking into a gallery and saying, I want that work and I want it today and I want to pay for it. So a gallery kind of benefits from that in that sense. But then the pro of that compared to an auction house is when you do go to an auction house, there's a big possibility that you'll be outbid on a work that you really wanted.
And so in this purchase scenario, when you're determining the appropriate purchase price between an auction venue versus a retail venue, how do you go about that? What would you recommend?
So it's an important thing when you're looking at an artist, and we do a lot of due diligence for our clients. So, you have to make sure a specific artwork that you're looking at buying ticks all the right boxes. So are you buying the right artist? Is it the right medium? Is the date a desirable date? Is the subject matter, is it iconic? And then also looking at condition reports, provenance, making sure that everything kind of right for the work and right for the price. An auction house, it's all online, so everything's there. And with the dealer, you really have to make sure that if you're buying a work from a dealer, you would more than likely want to get a condition report that wasn't written by the dealer, because they would write it in benefit for the work to sell. But it's important to buy the best work that you can of that artist within your budget. And we also do a lot of marketing analytics reports for our clients, where we look at all these aspects that I mentioned before, but we also look at where that specific work sits within the artist market, and we give advice on how much this work is worth in today's market and if it's a good investment. And sometimes this exercise can be quite an eye-opening exercise for some clients, where they might come to us saying that they want to buy a work from a gallery, and we might say to them, well, actually, the gallery is charging 30% more, and there's this comparable work that's coming up at auction. The estimate's much lower, and we think you could get it for a better price. So sometimes that's quite a good thing to look into.
Awesome. When I'm talking with clients, I'm often asked, or I'm often told that I buy what I like. And I'm wondering, why is that a risky approach to only focus on something that you might like versus something that may have more of a return on investment?
Yeah, I think to an extent, it's obviously to buy what you like, because there's no sure bet that what if you only buy for investment, that work is 100% always going to go up. But a lot of the time I tell my clients, buy with your eyes and then with your mind. So you must love it, but also do the research behind it. Make sure that you're buying a work that's a good investment if you're spending a certain amount of money on it. So a lot of the time we like to make sure that these artists are represented by good galleries, might be in a museum collection, have a good track records in the secondary market for at least a few years. A lot of the time, and I'm sure you know about this, but with the younger emerging artist market, it's very volatile. So, one hit wonder is the right thing to say, because sometimes these artist markets can be manipulated by speculators. And as quickly as these artist market can rise, they can also fall as quick as they rose. So it's really important to look at an artist market for at least a couple of years.
What to that end, what recommendations would you have to avoid this kind of one-hit wonder scenario?
Well, I always tell clients building up a collection is that when they are buying investment pieces, it is important to work with someone who is unbiased and works on behalf of you, because auction houses need to sell the sale, galleries need to sell their shows, and dealers need to sell inventory. So us as advisors, we work for the interest of our clients, and we make sure that they purchase the best work for their collecting needs within their budget. And we make sure that they never pay more than the current market price.
Do you have a few other recommendations that you might give for, let's say, arming buyers with good market insight and knowledge?
I think it's important, if you are looking a collection, to spend time going to museums, going to galleries, going to art fairs, reading as much as possible, and kind of training your eye, because we found like a lot of clients, when they first start collecting, they start collecting in one area, and once they learn more about that area or start seeing more art, their whole collection tastes change, and then they suddenly have part of a collection that they might not be fully kind of interested in, and their collecting needs have completely changed. So it's really good to just kind of train your eye as much as possible.
And in training your eye, what would you recommend? Gallery visits, visits to museums? Is there any kind of research that you would find to be best?
I think two best venues, in my opinion, would be going to auction house previews, because you get to see so many different artists at all different price levels in one room, which is amazing. Art fairs are great, but they can be very overwhelming. And a lot of the time, it can be overwhelming if you're by yourself and you're not with someone who kind of knows everything about the artist or the prices and things like that. It can be quite intimidating. So I think walking around auction houses is definitely a really good thing. And if galleries are close by, it's great to go to galleries as well.
Awesome. That's valuable insight. I think that part of this presentation, we're hoping to share some insight to when clients perhaps have misstepped. And in this particular case study number one, we thought that it would be interesting to think about due diligence. We're currently working with an athlete, a high-profile athlete, who is building a great collection of luxury timepieces with Swiss watches, so forth and so on. It is a hot market. It changes on a dime, and it's something that this client has specific interest in. The Rolex Daytona here that we're showing, well, not the Daytona our client purchased, but similar, was acquired while the athlete was out of town, away for a game. He popped into a really well-known jewelry store in a good city with a strong tourist trade, and bought the watch without guidance or feedback. He paid $70,000 for the Rolex, which may seem like a bargain to some. It may seem like overspending to others, but we thought it might be fun for everyone to have a guess at what the appropriate value was. So at the end of the day, at the end of this process, when we were brought in to think about retail replacement value and to think about collection management and appropriately caring for these objects over the long term, our jewelry specialists actually found that the client significantly overpaid. This particular watch and similar examples can often be found at an average of about $25,000. And working with an advisor, acquiring that knowledge and due diligence, perhaps even having an advisor to assist in negotiating the purchase overall would have been a much better transaction for this particular client. We're often thinking about this midsection. What do you do with this object now that you own it? How do we think about proper care? The first place to begin, we often think, is having those appraisals for replacement purposes, and in turn having those appraisals on hand, on file with your risk manager. So that there's no confusion as to what type of valuable assets and high value assets are within the collection. Similarly to what Roxanne has mentioned, is that we're always recommending that clients and their advisors monitor the markets closely. Like other commodities, these markets change on a regular basis. We see shifts up and shifts down depending on what's taking place in the global economy, the political arena, so forth and so on. And these particular assets can often see drastic changes. In the case of a wristwatch, that could be quarterly in some cases, depending on how unusual and rare that particular timepiece might be. We're always thinking about burden of proof, and I think that's something that is often forgotten about when we're working with high profile clients. There is this understanding that, well, I own it, I have it, but what if there's a significant loss, a catastrophic loss? Having that documentation, receipts, provenance, sale, appraisal, all help to back up the ownership of this object and make that claims process so much easier and simpler if there is some sort of disaster that needs to be handled. oftentimes with high profile clients, we're thinking about the movement of these objects from point A to point B, from New York to LA, and so forth. And we're always recommending that an appropriate fine art shipper and handler or a vetted storage facility are identified. Someone who has a track record in the market, someone who is known and experienced for handling these high value objects is so very important. And then finally, we're often thinking about in situ. What does it mean to own this object in your home, and how do you take care of it there? First and foremost is proper framing or proper placement out of the way of a door opening or direct sunlight. We're currently working with an interesting collection and really building this collection. And Roxanne and I were looking at works of art last week. And as we're placing these two-dimensional pieces on a digital background to present to our client, I just happened to notice that the hinges of the door into the room open directly into the canvas, and that could have surely been a disaster waiting to happen if there was not proper care and planning as to where these objects might actually live in the home and with the client. Now, I'd like to bring in my colleague Carrie Lee Jeffrey, and Carrie works with our clients in terms of consignment. What does it mean to take a collection to market? What does it mean to really achieve the highest revenue from objects? Carrie, how do you determine the most appropriate venue and market for sale for objects?
Hi, everyone. Well, I think it's important to first note that when we're looking at objects that clients are wishing to monetize, sometimes we're looking at an entire collection, sometimes it's an individual item. We assist clients with all different categories, from wine, collector cars, fine art, rugs, furniture, collectibles, numismatics, and coins, for instance. And so oftentimes these specific items sell in different methods. So you have a private sale, which Roxanne has spoken about. You have gallery placement, and you have auction. And so when we're looking at a collection that a client is wishing to sell, we look to see what is the best method to net the highest return. There are certain works, certain pieces that will not sell in a private setting. And there are other works that is going to be the best option for a client to net the highest return. Other works that are more primary market artists, and when I mention primary market, it means they do not have an established market at auction, would sell best in a gallery setting. And when selling with a gallery or dealer, you are placing a work at almost a retail price point, and oftentimes those works are included in shows, or they're included in curated exhibitions. It can take a little longer to sell. However, it will be the best method for that particular type of work. For other items, auction is the most appropriate method for sale. For many objects, fine furniture, decorative arts, it is the most appropriate venue, as those markets through dealers have shifted over the last 10, 15 years. But auction is also one of the strongest markets to sell very competitive works. It really does allow for competitive bidding. It allows for higher price points, especially for markets and artists where value is skyrocketing.
So in such a competitive and really diverse market, how do you gain the attention of the right buyer?
Well, I think it's really important, and I see the advisory team as fiduciaries, tangible asset fiduciaries, for these objects. Our number one goal is to net the client the highest return. And so when we're looking at an item, oftentimes these auction houses, and I've worked at auction for a number prior to Paul Moore for over a decade, the auction house's main goal is to get an item in and to sell it well. However, not all auction houses are created equally. They often have specialty departments within the auction house, or a specialized area. Perhaps they have the world record for a particular artist. Perhaps they have a sort of specialized division and expertise for evaluating these items. And oftentimes, when you're consigning a work to an auction house, you're consigning it to a particular department that you want to ensure that essentially that the due diligence is being done. They know how to properly evaluate and catalog the work. You want to know that they have the trust of serious buyers, that they have the marketing reach to reach the collectors and buyers for the particular work. An example I can give is a work we just helped we advised a client on monetizing. It's a work by Retina. So it's a contemporary artist, urban artist, street artist, I should say. And this particular artist market is quite a niche market on the secondary market. There are only a number of houses that have sold this artist well. And the one particular venue that we ended up advising that the work be sold in, they set the world record. And prior to sending the work there, we had reviewed the artist's results. All the different auction houses that had offered the works looked at the estimate versus the hammer. And this particular venue had set the record multiple times. And the reason it's the right venue is their marketing money goes into curating these specialized urban art sales. Our work was the cover lot. So essentially the attention that it was given at this particular venue was far greater than it would be given at another venue that did not have an urban art department, that did not have a track record for Retina, that did not have a large clientele of clients that had been actively bidding on Retina works. And so it made the world record for the artist in 2020. That was just a month ago. And I believe it was 150,000 against an estimate of 100 to 150. But as I mentioned, this also examples of this in other categories would include ensuring that if you have a client, for instance, that collects design, so early Tiffany lamps or arts and crafts, are you selling those pieces at the right venue where buyers would have trust in the venue? When you're looking at Tiffany lamps, for instance, there's significant issues with authenticity. There's significant issues, obviously, with condition. You can lose panes of glass and they can be replaced. If you are looking to sell, you want to ensure that you're selling at a venue where the buyers know that there are specialists and experts who are cataloging these pieces that can properly describe it. Therefore, buyers will have trust. They'll be willing to spend significantly more.
So I want to circle back to this idea of marketing in a moment, but I think so often we hear about the notoriety of a single owner sale. You open the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, and oftentimes there's a blockbuster Christie's auction or Sotheby's auction for a single collection. Can you talk to us a little bit about the benefits of what that might mean, or even perhaps a drawback?
Oh, definitely. I think that the single owner sales have been, for the last couple of years, those sales through Sotheby's, Christie's, other smaller regional houses have really been drawing attention to the items. They've been creating new collectors, bringing new buyers to auction. Oftentimes, these curated single owner collections, I should say, have significantly more marketing. They have their own standalone catalog. there's cross bidding between the different items within the sale. And I can give an example of, on the advisory team, as Roxanne mentioned, we acquire for clients all the time. And buying through some of these single owner sales can be challenging because those prices can be inflated. So wearing my selling hat, if I'm working with a client that has a very sort of curated collection of fine art, furniture, and decorative arts, if there is the possibility of selling a larger collection together attached to someone's name who has prominence, there is a significant return for the majority of the items. And this can go down to the small collectibles, furniture, decorative arts. We were bidding recently, well, within the last year, for a client in the Mario Buata sale. And there was a whole series of these sales for this designer. And our client loved a number of pieces in the sale, and we did our due diligence. We set the pricing appropriately for what he should pay for these items for long-term value, essentially, to ensure that he was paying the right price in the market. Many of the items sold significantly over what they were worth to some extent, purely because of the association with the name, the attachment with the name. And for that reason, putting my selling hat back on, is that these single owner sales, they allow sort of more modestly priced items to achieve a much higher eventual selling point, price point. And also it really sort of sets like a legacy for the individual, the client. So often when we're selling a larger collection for someone, they have this sort of capsule collection, this catalog is created for them. And so depending on the reasons for selling, they still have the curated collection, these catalogs that they can keep. And it works out for them.
I think we often also hear about the benefit of a specialized sale, perhaps an American painting sale, or a specific timepiece, fine timepieces sale, or something along those lines. Are there any advantages to those particular marketing scenarios?
Oh, certainly. When we're looking at a venue, auction, I'll speak about specifically, we're looking at the departments within the auction house. So, for instance, one particular auction house may have a strength in Orientalist art versus another auction house that will have a strength in 20th century design, or another auction house that just specializes in Western art. And the importance of this is that they have a dedicated catalog and clientele for this niche market. One example I can think of, right now we're assisting a client with the sale of antiquities, so Roman glass, Greek glass, pottery. This is a very specific small market. Many auction houses no longer even have this department anymore. So it's sort of refined down further. The significant collectors for this particular collectible are only looking at a certain number of venues where they can trust that the items are authentic, that they can trust the cataloging, that there's it's a very sort of there's a trust issue there, obviously, with authenticity of ancient items, but this can also fall to other categories where, for instance, there's two firms that really specialize in design. They have a dedicated early 20th century design department. They only sell pieces in that sale from, say, 1880 to pre-war, pre-World War I. Their marketing efforts are directed to all the right buyers and collectors for those items, versus if those items were to sell in a general mixed sale with, so you have an important Tiffany lamp, and then you have a a Moreau print and then a Georgian piece of furniture, you're diluting the collector's focus to some degree for those specialty items. For Western art, for instance, it is such a niche market. The buyers are essentially all based in the United States. And so you have houses that are dedicated solely to selling Western art, and that's classic Western artists, as well as leading up to sort of more primary market artists that are still creating works today. And those works in a larger fine art sale don't tend to do as well. You need those works to be in the right venue where there's an event around the sale. It's usually an annual social event as well. And that's when you see the most appropriate prices.
If we're thinking about the dollars and cents of what it means to take a collection to market, what do you see for clients? What do clients expect to pay to perhaps monetize these objects?
Certainly. Well, when you're looking at selling via a dealer, for instance, there can be a larger range in commission that usually is going to be based on the value of the work, the type of dealer. Is this an important gallery in New York and it's a work in the millions, versus if you're sending something to consignment at an antique dealer in Beverly Hills, usually the commission can go upwards to 35%. That is applied once the work sells. For auction, there's a number of fees that sellers need to be aware of. There's the seller's commission, which is entirely negotiable, and that is one of our jobs is to ensure that our client is paying the lowest amount possible for this, for the sale of the work. If they were to walk into an auction house off the street, they can be met with consignment terms of some smaller houses will charge up to 30%. Average will charge 10 or 15%. For many of our clients, we can get that percentage down to 0. In some cases, we can negotiate to have the auction house pay the client. And this happens through something called the buyer's premium. And the buyer's premium is not negotiable. It's essentially 25% or 23%, depending on the venue, that is the buyer of the work pays. So if a work hammers for 10,000, the buyer will pay 12,500. The seller, if they're at 0, will get the 10,000. If a work is of considerable value and the auction house they really, really want to sell it and it's the right venue, and Paul Moore said, yes, this is where it should go, the auction house will often pay the consignor back part of the buyer's premium. So we can negotiate, and we've done this for many of our clients, is to have a portion of that buyer's premium go back to the seller. So instead of just being at 0, they'll actually get 4% or 3% of the buyer's premium coming back to them above the hammer price. When something sells at auction, a seller can expect to be paid between 35 and 45 days after the sale. It depends on the venue. And we obviously, part of our role is to ensure we negotiate the contract, we follow up with the houses to ensure that everything is going smoothly.
And so out of the fees, commission aside, and I think you hit on this a moment ago, would you say that everything within an agreement for potential monetization through an auction scenario is negotiable?
Everything is negotiable. I would say that there are some instances, depending on the value of the item, where commissions have to be at a certain place. Obviously, there's expenses to the auction house for moving, shipping, storing for some items. our role obviously is to minimize all those costs and to get it down to a flat net commission. So really erasing all those subsidiary fees that an auction house can charge, such as insurance, photography, storage, pickup. They sometimes have marketing fees. Sometimes there'll be fees of up to $250 per image. And if you have a number of works, that can really add up. Our goal really is to get that down to, if there is going to be a fee, down to a net amount, a very simple percentage, so that the seller and their advisors and their team can know what to anticipate in terms of a final value.
And so that final value, what can you expect in terms of compensation? Say, let's think timeline, maybe beginning to end.
It's usually 35 to 45 days after the sale date. So looking at auction, a work or a piece can be at the auction house 2 to 3 months prior. You want pieces to be there as early as possible so they can get marketing and exposure. But in terms of payout, that is pretty standard. It's 35 days after the sale that a client would be wired the funds, minus their commission, if there is one.
Awesome. Thank you. Do you want to take case study number 2? I think you had direct relationship to this particular work.
This is such a good example to really, really highlight the importance of having an advisor assist you with placing a work for sale. So this is at Prayer Hagia Sophia. Going to pronounce this wrong, but Stanislaus von Chlebowski. So it's a beautiful, detailed Orientalist work. And what's really interesting is that this work came up to sale at auction twice within the same 6 months. So it originally sold at an international auction house in a general fine arts sale in, I believe it was November 2015. And it sold for 50,000. It sold for 50,000 in November 2015. Within 6 months, it sold at Sotheby's, London, in their specialized sale for £125,000. So this is very unusual to have these two, the same work come up for sale within that short time period, but it really does highlight the importance of these specialty sales. The Orientalist market is very, very strong. These buyers look to these specialty annual sales, or biannual sales, I should say, in London. They are not looking at a smaller regional house or a 19th century sale in Los Angeles. So for this particular painting, had this client, this wasn't our client, but had this client come to us, we would have said, let's wait, let's get it into the most appropriate venue, it'll net you the highest return. Even if you have to ship it to London, the cost of shipping it there is not going to make, $2,000, $3,000. To have it sell for considerably more is the most appropriate thing to do.
And our final case study, do you want to tackle this one? I think that you helped with the consignment.
Yeah. So this is a painting that I think most people won't, it's obviously a very unusual work. It's by an interesting illustration artist. And this is the sort of work that I think is important to look at, because obviously it's not a considerably valuable work. It's but it's by an artist called Boris Vallejo. And again, this particular work, if it were to be sold in a sort of a small regional house near where the consignor was, it would be completely overlooked. It would not be considered important. It would not be advertised by that venue. It would literally be one of a sort of a mixture of works. So even though this estimate that we had for this work was only 3,000 to 5,000, as a fiduciary, my role was to ensure that it went to the right venue to maximize the revenue for the client. And even if that meant shipping it to, across the United States. And in doing so, we actually set the world record. So what did the painting sell for? It sold for 40,000. And that is still the world record price for this illustrator. And he has a very, very small market. So at a small venue in New Jersey, for instance, the work may have just sold for 5,000 or 8,000 in an illustration sale at a venue where they specialize in this artist. The particular venue actually has sold the vast majority of works by Boris. They've sold, I think, 211 out of 224 works. So this is a case where I was reviewing this one work for a client. This was the only work they had to sell, and ensured that it went to the right venue where it was going to be seen by collectors, and it got them a much better return.
Awesome. Thank you, Carrie. That really brings us to an end today. So thanks everyone for attending. We certainly hope that this was informative and shed some light on our process and really how we're proactive in terms of assisting our high profile clients and their tangible assets. At this time, I'd love to open it up to questions if anyone has a thought.
I see 2 questions on the chat, actually, but
All right, let's see if I can find my chat. I'm sorry.
the first one is, isn't that
Thanks.
Hama share? I
think that might have been in relation when you were speaking about the buyout with the buyer's premium, the splitting of the buyer's premium.
Yes. Okay. So if the Hama, my example, if the Hama was 10,000, the buyer's premium would be 25% of that 10,000. So the buyer would pay a total of 12,500. But for certain clients, we can, for the seller at least, we can negotiate for them to have a piece of that buyer's premium if the work has considerable value.
Awesome. Thank you. One of the questions that we received is, could a client negotiate the fees associated with our services before coming on board? Absolutely. We're happy to look at clients in terms of a holistic approach, what they might have, how they might benefit from our services, what would be an appropriate course of action to providing an advisory voice, if you will. Part of our position in the market is that we are thought leaders in the tangible asset industry, and our pricing and our approach is meant to be transparent from beginning to end. And so the numbers and the way we're quoting for clients are meant to be very clear in terms of the services we're providing, exactly what the client's paying for, a direct understanding of deliverables and responsibilities, and what the end result will be. I think that's very important to discuss, simply because many consider the art world to be that kind of last great unregulated industry of the sector of the financial industry, and having that transparency really brings our profession into a more solid position. And then I have one other question here. Where would you suggest people to research venues to sell artists specific to works? Carrie, that one might be for you.
Well, I don't think there's a clear sort of straight answer for that. I do think that that's why you would need an advisor. There are search engines on, the internet where you can sort of search within to see, oh, what venue has the highest price for a particular piece or work. But oftentimes auction houses don't all report to the same listing. So when we're reviewing the right market for an item, I'm looking at not just all these sort of auction prices across 5 or 6 different platforms, but I'm also looking at retail listings as well to see if that's the most appropriate. But there are sites like ArtNet, which is subscription-based, Ask Art, Invaluable for furniture and decorative arts, and design. But you've also got to know to filter out those results. So is this a work that was in a single or in a sale or the artist's estate? So you've got to be able to interpret those results as well. But really, we look through all those different sites, as well as discussions with dealers and so forth.
Can you give perhaps an example of something, a current work or object that we're selling, and the complexities of the process?
Certainly. So it's part of a really large collection, but we're selling a very rare red diamond. It's coming up for sale at Sotheby's in New York in their magnificent jewels sale. And this was, advisory process, I think 2 years in the making. And the complexities around this piece are for the seller is, jewelry has an emotional attachment. There is a relationship between a seller, a private client, and the dealers they previously worked with to acquire some of these pieces. There needs to be due diligence and market analytics surrounding the pricing of the piece. And then in terms of jewelry, colored stones, there is a period of time where the diamonds actually need to be recertified. So if they were last looked at in the early 2000s, there now is new scientific equipment that the GIA is utilizing to properly evaluate these stones. What may have been seen as fancy orange pink is now a fancy orange if those colors have shifted. And for colored stones, especially if you're looking at significant stones that are in the millions, having something recertified, having it reevaluated by the appropriate labs is very important prior to going to sale. And oftentimes when we're looking at jewelry, our clients do not have the right lab paperwork. They may have been sold the piece by a jeweler who used one particular lab that did not disclose all the flaws. So oftentimes they're getting a surprise. This actually has an inclusion, and it's been mounted in such a way to hide the inclusion. So when we're assisting a client with coming to sale, oftentimes we're looking at that piece with very fresh eyes, a very independent view outside of the original purchase price, and really looking at what the appropriate market price is. So whether that's setting the private sale price, or when choosing a venue for auction and discussing the strategy around selling the work or piece.
I will also kind of piggyback to that, Carrie, in terms of working with high-profile collections and deaccessioning objects from someone who may be notable. It is important to think about security and discretion before moving forward. We find that executing NDAs and moving very deliberately to be the most appropriate course of action here. Our goal is to minimize impact to value. So avoiding over-shopping an object, being very detailed about placement and process and the steps that we're following in order to ensure that we're not damaging this value in any way, but we're also not leaving this particular client open to exposure, if you will. And I think that's a key characteristic when we're thinking about managing assets for celebrities, as well as potentially taking them to market.
I do see a question about collector cars, and I just wanted to note that that is an area that we advise and assist on. There are lots of specifics involved with the sale of collector cars, and for a lot of our clients, that actually does make up a large part of their portfolio. It wasn't on the chart at the beginning of the presentation, but it's a very significant area of collecting. There are obviously a number of different venues that specialize in certain smaller areas within collecting collectible cars, and we utilize specialists and experts within those particular areas.
Awesome. Well, if there are no other questions, we will sign off. Thank you again, everyone, for attending. We know that you're busy. We certainly appreciate. Oh, I think I have one other question here. I apologize. So, the issue with searching out advisors is you don't know what you don't know. Advisors should be aware of all what makes available. Some markets are not always so apparent. Carrie or Roxanne, any thoughts regarding identifying apparent markets and the due diligence and research that you might have to go through to determine next best steps and best practices?
I would agree with Alva. Yes, I mean, knowing what you don't know is, not knowing what you don't know, I guess, is the perfect way to put it. There are niche markets that are not going to be sort of widely available through a search engine or through one of these auction reporting sites. It really does take some years of knowledge. It takes years of looking at these catalogs, going to the auction previews, knowing which specialists within an auction house are the right people to not only bring your work to market, but actually know the right collectors to make a phone call to. It really, it's a search engine can tell you how many records, how many artworks by that artist in an auction house was sold, what the highest price was, but it doesn't have all the nuance and that you would need to know the particular catalogs, the specialists, and so forth.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. We certainly appreciate your time this afternoon and this morning for those on the West Coast. If there are other questions or a particular need, you're welcome to reach out to any of our team members. My contact information is here on the thank you page. You're welcome to give me a ring, shoot me a text, an email. We're generally always available. So please do reach out. And thank you so much again. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, everyone.